Hi, I'm Mary Lyons, the Wealth Woman.
And I'm Eric Alexander with Acorn Grove.
Welcome to the Wealth and Income Podcast. Geez, it has been long enough since we've done one of these. I almost reverted to our original podcast
That's
name
right.
when I
It's been a
said
hot
that.
minute.
It has been. Well, just to give everybody an update on where we've been and what we've been up to, we took a little bit of a hiatus to kind of look at the business and look at the podcasts and really analyze everything we're doing in our professional and personal lives to figure out what we want to keep doing, what we want to stop doing, and what we need to modify.
Yeah.
And
The walkabout.
yeah, and as always, I feel like Eric is the key genius behind most of the brilliant things we do. And he found a book that I think has been already life altering for both myself and for a lot of the people at our company.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the few books that I listened to first and then read like almost immediately afterwards and started taking notes and oh my gosh, how do I apply this? It's been a great book.
So, if you're wondering what the book is, it is 4,000 Weeks Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. And
Yes.
I think that name in some ways is a little bit misleading. The time management for mortals. This book is about so much more than time management.
Yeah. And that was his brilliant kind of comment on that. It was for a long time, he was a productivity hacker, productivity genius. How do I get it all done? And then I think just kind of broke and was like, that's not how life is supposed to work. It's not piling more and more stuff in and just trying to figure out how to organize it. There's got to be more.
Right. And if you think about his title, 4,000 weeks is about the average lifespan. So 4,000
Yeah.
weeks divided by 52, because that's how many weeks are in a year, puts us right at 77 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's annoying because it's like a week goes by so fast and every Friday afternoon I'm like, where did the week go? And I just burned one of my 4,000 weeks or 4,160 or however many I get, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's daunting. And Mary, you had a comment last week that I thought was really hilarious, something to the effect of basic all of adulthood is going to the end of the week and thinking, next week I'm going to get my life together. And you say that every week for for the next 50, for the next 50 years.
Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can find that quote. I don't know. I'm gonna botch it, but it's adulting is basically saying things are gonna calm down next week over and over again until you die.
Basically.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but that is definitely my life. It's busy, busy. And I'm like, well, maybe
Yeah.
next week I'll get a breather.
Yeah. Well, and we say it at our house every week. If only we could declutter the house, we'd be in a much better spot. And then forgetting that we have two, an 8 and a 12-year-old, and they're little tornadoes that run through the house and wreck everything that we're trying to fix. So
The way it works.
it
They do
never
it with
gets
time
done.
management too.
That's right.
Remember when we
Yes.
had free time back in the day?
And all we did with it was work.
Yeah, no joke. That's true. I remember those days. So, here's the thing that I think is crazy. When we did this, we kind of talked about this and did a little workshop internally in
Yeah.
our office. And I think your toilet paper analogy was really helpful here.
Yeah. And I don't remember where I got that. All my good ideas come from somewhere else. I just remember them enough to regurgitate them. But somebody once told me that life is like a roll of toilet paper, that at the beginning, every kind of square you're pulling, it's kind of going slowly. But then as the roll of toilet paper gets smaller and smaller, man, those things are flying off the roll as they get
Yeah.
smaller and smaller, right? And that idea that every week that goes by, you have fewer new weeks that you get in front of you, and they kind of keep ticking, which is really kind of morbid.
It
Uh,
is, but I do feel like that is the way I'm experiencing life, in all honesty. I mean, I can remember
yeah,
being a kid sitting in the classroom watching the second hand on the clock just tick, 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 waiting for school to get out. And it felt like it took forever. And I remember like even the feeling of summer, it was so long. And then now it just goes. There's
yeah,
there's very few moments in my life that feel like they are taking a long time.
yes.
And it's usually the unpleasant ones that feel like they're taking a long time, not the good ones. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, well, we're hoping to speed it up, hoping to get, and he talks about it in the book, right? We're hoping just to speed something up just so we can get through it. only to get to the next thing without being present in the middle thing that you're doing.
Hmm.
uh, and and missing that there may be some cool things that you're missing out on in that moment.
Right. Well, and here's the thing that I thought was crazy because you asked this question when you were teaching this in our office, and the question was, how could productivity be an avoidance behavior? And I was like, wait, I'm doing stuff. Doing stuff is productive. Productive is good. But I think one of the major points in this book is that the more efficient we get, the more stuff we try and cram in, but the less discernment we apply about what stuff we should actually be doing. And so we say yes to a bunch of things that either we don't need to do or we don't need to do well. And we end up trying to do everything really well. And so then what we don't end up with satisfaction. We end up feeling like a ping pong ball. But what's
Yeah.
really happening is we don't have to deal with our own mortality.
Yes. Well, and I think there's so much of the Grant Cardone. I think he was the one that did the 10x life, and all the rest of that stuff, where we see productivity and hustle culture and all of this as a sort of badge of honor. Like, man, I
Mm.
had my first heart attack at 41. It's like, oh, you slacker. Mine was at 36. You should have worked harder. Like it's sort of, I didn't really have my first heart attack at 41, but that idea that, like, man, if you're not hustling, like, what are you doing? You're kind of a loser. Like, you haven't figured it out. And that
Mhm.
idea that if I can just stay busy, it feels like I'm being productive or accomplishing things,
Right.
but there's no, who was it? Stephen Covey talked about this. Like, what a horrible thing to have climbed the ladder of life only to figure out that your ladder was resting on the wrong wall. And like
Mhm.
trying to remember, or trying to take a step back every once in a while, going, all right, am I climbing the right ladder? Am I productive in the right ways?
Right. Am I doing the things that actually are meaningful to me? And
Yeah.
I know for me, a lot of what this has kind of churned up, I feel like there's been this journey for me personally, and I know for a lot of our clients as well, as we start talking about, things like deciding what your dreams are and actively and intentionally creating your dream life. Um, really figuring out which of those dreams is meaningful and which ones aren't. It's my sort of constant problem is if there is space in my calendar, I will fill it with something. And
Yeah.
then I am constantly like, oh my gosh, how am I this busy? I like, when am I supposed to think? When am I supposed to recharge and recover? Like, even that has to be scheduled very deliberately into my calendar. And, the idea that if it's on my calendar, I have to do it and I can't deviate from that, because if I deviate from that, then everything moves further and longer. Sometimes it's a lot of pressure. And I think even going back to like the middle of COVID, I had this conversation with a friend this past
Yeah.
weekend. It was like, it wasn't the best of times by any stretch of the imagination, but there are some things that I miss. And one of those things was that all of the extracurricular activities stopped. And I don't mean that just for my kids, I mean that for myself too.
Yeah.
And so I had all this time to figure out, oh, those things aren't making me happy, or, ooh, these things really are. And for the first time, really, since probably I've had kids, I had hobbies. And I promised myself that coming out of that, I was going to guard that time as if it was sacred. But here we are years later, and
Right.
no, I did not.
Well, and I think it goes back to that idea that you talked about a long time ago of whose scorecard are you playing off of? Are
Hmm.
you playing off your scorecard or somebody else? And I think some of the other things that we get sucked into are things that are not necessarily bad. Like, hey, we should go volunteer for PTA. It's a very noble thing. It is a very good thing to go do. But is it the most important thing you could be doing, or is it the thing that you're giving your best, that's getting the most of you, the best of you? Is this where you're spending one of your 4,000 weeks? Maybe not, but it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Like, the
Well, and I
hard part
think
of this is deciding those things that are good that we should be doing and saying no to those.
Well, and I think it also depends on who you are, because there are
Correct.
certainly things. I mean, we just had this conversation before hopping onto this recording, is that there are things I'm really good at and there are things you're really good at. And I shouldn't be doing your things and you shouldn't be doing my things. We should be
Right.
focusing on the highest and best use that each of us has and not worry about the other pieces.
Well, and not yelling at ourselves and chiding ourselves because I'm not a better Eric or I'm not a better Mary or I'm not a
Right.
better somebody else, right? That's and I think it goes back to that scorecard thing,
Hmm.
right? And we've had this conversation 1,000 times. I look at over at the stuff that you're doing, I'm like, holy crap, she's just amazing. Why am I not? And it's like, wait a minute, stop. She's amazing in different ways than I'm amazing, and just
Right.
leave it alone.
Well, I think comparison certainly is the thief of joy.
Yeah,
And I think the
100%.
culture that we live in right now, I mean, just think about YOLO and FOMO and all of those little acronyms that come out that are really about missing out on things. And I
Yeah.
think what happens is because we don't want to miss anything, we try to do too many things and then we aren't actually really present for any of them.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the concepts he talked about in the book. What he termed JOMO, the joy of missing out. Like once you're really clear about what it is that you're supposed to be doing, and if I only have 4,000 weeks and I've got 1,700 things on my like mental wish list, to do list, whatever it is, and I know I'm only gonna get to maybe 100 of them, it's very freeing to go. You know what? There's other 1,600 things. I'm not gonna get to those ever. And once you let go of them, there's some joy in like those aren't judges anymore. They're just gone.
It's relief.
Yeah.
I think the story was attributed in the book to Warren Buffett. And it was funny for me when I was reading it. I'm like, oh, Eric told me this years ago. This is a familiar story to me.
Right.
In the story, it's Warren Buffett's pilot asking
Yeah.
him, hey, how do I prioritize what I want to do? And Warren Buffett says, make a list of the top 25 things that are important to you. And so he's like, okay, great. I made the list. How do I make time for all of these? And the answer is you don't. You pick five, and those are the ones you do. And everything else is just dangerous because the top five things are the things that are clearly the most important to you. But the rest are the things that kind of matter enough to be interesting and to distract you from your real priorities.
Well, and think about how big that list was probably in his brain to get down to 25. Like there's
Right.
thousands of things you could do in your life. And
Hmm.
he narrowed it down to 25, which seems like a really small list compared to the 1,000 that I could probably come up
Of
with
all the
tomorrow.
things you could come up
Right.
with.
And then to score it down to another five, like that's it. And everything else has to go.
Right.
Yeah. But once you let go of it, it's like, okay, well, then
I don't need
that's not
that.
my thing. I don't need it anymore.
Right. It's like me in travel. I don't need it. But if you look at my
Yeah.
list, it is the longest part of my list. Now, I'm not saying I don't want to travel at all, but if you look at my dreams list, that took up the majority of
Yeah.
what we were doing as we went through and made the list. But when I think about it in terms of prioritization, there are other things on that list that are much more important to me than traveling.
Yeah.
And so it would be easy because it's enticing and it looks good on social media and all of that to go that direction, but it doesn't mean it's what's actually satisfying. And I think part of what this book did is it kind of framed for me, if you only have a limited amount of time, and I look at my current age and I'm more than halfway done, according to this book. Now, I think I have a little bit longer just because I got some longevity in my family.
Right.
But thinking about being halfway done and what I've accomplished to this point, I feel like, okay, that's progress, but is it really what I want? And so it has definitely created some different conversation at home about
Yeah.
whether our actions are matching what our stated values are, right?
Yeah.
Because it's really easy to say my first priority is my family. But then if you're making a bunch of choices that keep you at work, working late, and you're missing your kids' games and you're not present for them during the hard conversations, is your family really what's important to you?
Yeah.
Or is that how you're justifying being at work? Because maybe that's what's actually really important to you. Or even
Well,
like
yeah,
if you have, think about our clients, they get job opportunities all the time.
yeah, 100%.
May double your pay, but then you're not seeing your family anymore. Is that the right choice?
Yeah. Well, I remember you and I had a conversation. This is a couple of years ago with a guy named Garrett, and he and his wife had that conversation. Like, here's what's important to us. Here's where things go. Here's blah 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 blah. Right. And I remember him talking about that, and he says, like, "Honey, I got this great deal. I get to go be on these radio shows and these talk shows and these podcasts. I can influence millions and millions of people." She's like, "That's amazing. What time does when do you guys record?" He goes, "It's amazing. It's at 6 o'clock at night." And she says, and he's relaying the story. She says, the kids and I are about to go out on a walk. We're going to go ahead and take a walk because we're going to walk around the block and do that kind of stuff. I need you to think about what you just said and see if that's the right choice. And he says, by the time they got back, he's like, "Oh, that's right in the middle of dinner. That's right in the middle of kid time. That's right in the middle of like reading books." And he goes, "Nope, it's not the right move."
Right.
But it's hard because we were thinking about, I can control this.
Opportunity,
Yep, exactly.
productivity, accomplishment, income, right?
Right.
I mean, I think what it really boils down to is that life is a series of trades, and you have to decide which trades are the
Yes.
important ones for you, right? Because it's going to be different for each person. And this is where, so this is not financial in nature, but it kind of is because all of these choices do impact things like your income, right? And your
Yeah.
income then impacts when you get to retire, what type of trips you get to take, what you purchase, all of that sort of stuff. And I don't think that money creates happiness, but it can certainly facilitate a lot of activities that do.
Right.
Whether those are telic or atelic, right? Telic being purposeful, like I'm giving to a church or charity, or whether it is something like a trip or a time with your family, which is strictly for enjoyment. I think that when we don't have clarity on what is important to us, we do whatever we want in the moment. And I think that even with a dreams list and working through all of that, you have to revisit the conversation over and
Yeah.
over again because there are so many different things that can pull you off sides. And you think you're being deliberate about what you're building. And then you look at it and you're like, wait, no, no, I didn't. I did that because there was a hard sell, or I did that because in the moment it seemed like something. But if you don't have the target, you certainly can't hit it.
Yeah. And I was thinking about a conversation I heard this morning. And the guy was talking to a friend of his, and he says, "I'm struggling with this decision. Like I don't want to have this conversation with the guy, and I'm thinking about not having that conversation. I'm trying to figure out what to do in this direction." And he said, "So what would you do if you weren't afraid?" He goes, "Well, I would say this conversation. I would have this conversation with this guy. I'd make this decision." He goes, "All right, call me back in an hour after you've talked to that guy." He's like, "Oh, well, I guess that's the answer." Right. And I think so, to your point earlier about should I take this job? Should I do this direction? I think so much of it is sort of the default button because we know what that's going to look like. We're not
Right.
afraid of it because it's the next progression versus
Mhm.
going, if I wasn't afraid, where would I go and what decisions would I make? And how do we lean into that, even though it might be really uncomfortable or really hard, or we're not sure where it's going to go? But if we start from I would go do this, and this is what I would make my life look like if I wasn't afraid to go do it.
Mhm.
Because how many people do we know that take crappy jobs that they hate because they make a lot of money, and then
Mhm.
they end up blowing up their whole system financially because their body at some point in their brain, some voice says, "Nope, I'm not doing this anymore." And then
Right.
everything they created just sort of unravels when if they had made a different choice,
Or
it
they
would have
just
been,
stay in a space where they're miserable because they have
yes.
bills to pay and a lifestyle to support, and they've created expectations about what that life is supposed to look like.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, and to this end, I can remember having a conversation at some point when I was growing up with my dad, and I was probably too young to understand all the long-term ramifications and implications of the conversation at the time we had it. But it is a conversation that I think about a lot because I remember being mad at my dad because he traveled a lot he was gone a lot for work because he had multiple offices across the state that he was managing. He was ramping up new businesses. I mean, he
Right.
was working his tail off. And he came home, and I'm sure he was exhausted and probably just wanted to sit on the couch, have a beer, and watch golf for a little bit. And I was mad at him. And so I told him, I'm mad at you because you're never here. And he was like, well, I'm doing this for you. Right. And I remember telling him, well, you never asked me what I want. And what I would prefer is to have a lot less money, but actually get to spend time with you. And as a parent, man, at that conversation, like I think about it from a completely different context. And I think about how difficult it must have been for him to hear that, where he's out there doing absolutely everything he knows how to do to make sure he is providing for my mom and for me and for my
Yep.
brother in the way that has been modeled for him and in the way that gave him a ton of satisfaction to actually do it.
Yeah.
And to be told, well, that's not what I want, right? But I think about these things because I look at that even with my own life, and it's all the choices we make. And this goes again to the same 4,000 weeks. They don't just affect us. They
Yeah.
affect everybody else in our immediate family, at least, and possibly beyond that as well.
Yeah. And I think part of that is finding that balance in the middle. Because you would
Mhm.
have said that and right up into the point that you were homeless. And then you're like, all right, dad, go, get
Go
back
get
out
a
to work.
job.
Right.
Right. Or to the point where I needed the right pair of sneakers because I went to a very like a school where you were judged on that and you didn't stand a chance unless you had the things, right? And so,
Correct.
you know, I didn't know what it was like to be on the other side of that. That's for sure.
Yeah. And so I think that's always and that's why I think one of his great lines in the whole book is there will never be a day in your future where you have no more problems and where everything is under control. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I think your point on that is brilliant. It's like it is always a balancing act between what is most important to me. And I think some things that you get further into and you're like, you know what? I thought this was a really, really important thing that needed to be on the 4,000 weeks bus. No. And it needs to be pruned off and you need to upgrade it and change it. And as you go off and you start your own family and he's an empty nester, they need to redo that conversation all over again
Right.
with him and your mom of like, okay, we don't have soccer practice and baseball
Yeah, what do
practice and
we want
volleyball and
now?
badminton and blah blah blah.
Right.
What is important to us now, right? And that's why I think it's annoying. The book is annoying. It's incredibly annoying because it means I can't answer that question once and be done.
Well, and that's just it. There are no answers, just a lot of questions. And you
Just
have to
incredibly
figure it
annoying.
out. And then you think you have it figured out, but then you evolve as a human or your spouse evolves, and then all of a sudden the answer is different. And so, I feel like it's just one of those things where we're all doing the best we can. There's an element of I read this book and I was like, dang, I really felt like I was killing it. And now I need to go back and relook at my whole life and see, am I actually though? Am I actually? And I think this gets scarier, honestly,
But
Eric, as
it's
a
grace that you're going to have grace in the middle of that, though.
yeah, but I look at this and I'm like, okay, my daughter graduates from high school in 5 years.
Yeah.
I have 5 years left with her before she's out of the house. How important is that networking event, right? How important is it for me to go out of town for a business event? Like, are those the right things for where we are at this stage of life? I don't know the answer to that because there's one element that says yes, because I'm modeling what hard work looks like. I'm modeling what it looks like to pursue a career and dreams and have a work ethic and like build so that you have enough financially to do the things that are on your dreams list.
Yes.
And then the other part of it, I'm like, but I miss you.
Well, and I think that's it, though. It's just is the juice worth the squeeze? We've had that conversation 1,000 times,
That's the
right?
question.
And
Mhm.
and I think it's hey, I've weighed it in the balance, and I've right now this is the best choice that I can make with the knowledge that I have. And I think the other component of that is a little bit of grace or a little bit of what Dan Sullivan would call the gap in the gain is like, okay, I can't go back in time and fix a conversation I had 30 years ago. Like that's
Right.
not a thing. I had to make the best decision with what we had. I remember my dad when I was growing up, Saturday morning, he worked at a dealership when I was a kid. He was the finance and insurance guy. Like I stupid apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to sell cars, but he was every Saturday morning. We'd be sitting there eating Cheerios and whatever, watching cartoons. And you could tell every Saturday morning, I feel so bad for him for that. He just wanted to sit down and hang out with us. But he's like,
Mhm.
nope, it's Saturday.
I'm
People are buying
kidding.
cars. I gotta go. I
Right.
gotta go make a buck because we don't want to be homeless. So
So let's talk practical for a second, because I think a lot of times these conversations are helpful in an esoteric kind of way, right? What can we actually do though? Like what questions can we ask ourselves? How do we figure this out? Because um, I think there are some ways here, some things here that are really helpful. So like you mentioned strategic neglect, which he talks
yeah,
about in the
I was
book.
just thinking about that.
When you choose not to do something, is it avoidance, or is it I'm strategically pruning something from my life because it doesn't have value? How do you know?
Yeah, and I think it's that intentionality. And for me, the one of the things that I thought about as I read that book is not every single thing in my life needs to be an A plus. Like I don't need to get an A in every aspect of life. And so one of the things that I'm starting to look through is kind of an ABC. Right?
Mhm.
What activities do I need to get an A at? I need to be a good dad. Okay, that's in the A column. I need to pay my taxes. I just need to get a B at that. Does it have to be perfect? It has to be perfect enough that I don't go to jail. But like if I'm spending 17 weeks of every year fretting over my taxes, I'm doing it wrong. Like I need to either
Right.
offload it or simplify it. Right. So in those activities, I need to get a B. And then my thought on that is if there's an activity that all I need to do is to get a C at it, maybe that's the first one that we start looking at how to get rid of. Because if I
Mhm.
don't really need to get even an A or B at, then why am I doing it? And sort of maybe just having that list of the ability to prune it, but prune it in such a way that it's intentional and not just stop paying taxes, stop taking care of my kids.
Yeah, also we are not advising you to do those things, just for clarity.
Correct. Yes, because your kids are important.
Yes, well,
Oh,
apparently
and
so.
oh, and taxes too.
That too. So, I think I got distracted here because I felt the need to put that disclaimer in, but I think I think there are things that came to mind immediately when you were talking about that, because there are things that, for example, in our business, I need to get an A at, but that don't bring me energy.
Correct.
And so that I think becomes an important next step too, is surrounding yourself with people who do get energy from doing those things at an A level, and then delegating those things to people who can do them much better than you, right? I mean, I think about even just kind of how we're starting to change our setup. I love the front end of talking and teaching and getting people to
Right.
have those aha moments and galvanizing them into action to change the trajectory of their life. But I'm not good at systems or structure. And so I feel like, but our clients deserve all of those things. And
Right.
so your ability to create those things and then find the right people to manage them is off the charts. And so I look at that and I think, okay, this is how you do it, is that you have to get to a place where you don't expect to do everything on your own. You've got
Yeah.
people that you're building around you to help you make this happen, right? In some ways it's the old thought process, right? You shouldn't be doing the things that suck you dry of energy if you can pay someone else to do them, and then systematically like offloading more and more of the things that are not making you happy, so that you're only doing the things that actually further what's important to you.
Well, and remembering that everyone is different and the things that you hate, someone else may think is the coolest job in the world.
I
Like,
mean,
and
I
not
think
going,
about
you want
that
to do that? Oof.
every day with Cheryl in our office,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, she is such a badass at what she does, and she
Yeah.
loves it. And she tells me all the time how much she loves her job. And I'm like, "Ooh, thank goodness." Because if I had to do that job, it would take me 4 times as long and I would make everyone around me miserable. And I think that puts you in a place of gratitude when you can recognize those things and let go of them, and then really create the space for somebody else to shine.
Yeah. And as you were talking about that, I think part of that is the ABC. Like what do I need to get an A, B, or C at? But I think the other thing is if there's something in your life where you're like, we really need to get this done. There's a big giant should in your life that we need to get this done, but you can't seem to quite find the energy or the time to go do that. I think one of two things are happening, and this is part of Dan Sullivan sort of conversation is either you're scared of it because you're not quite sure how to do it, but it's important, and you're procrastinating because you are like, I'm scared of this next step because I don't know what it looks like. You should probably lean into that. If you're procrastinating it because you're like, I don't want to do this, then that's a really clear indicator that you should get rid of it. Like if you're like, ugh, and then you do it and it takes 10 minutes to do, you're like, why didn't I do it the last time? I could have solved this problem 6 months ago. That's a first thing on your list to get rid of.
Yeah.
But the things that scare you, that scare the crap out of you, you probably should lean into that.
Yeah. That's
right?
real advice right there. I'm having aha moments as you're speaking, right? I'm not doing this because I'm scared, but that's precisely why I should do it. It's that element of getting uncomfortable with being uncomfortable, right? I think,
yeah. Well, he talked about that too, of like, if you're, to let you off the hook a little bit here, but this is something I needed when I read through the book, is this idea of embracing radical incrementalism. Like if there's something that's scaring you and you're not sure what the next step is, do the first smallest, teeniest, tiniest thing towards it. Even if when you tell somebody what you're going to go do, they go, really? Like, slow down, Tiger. Like, that's all you're doing today? Like, whoa.
Well, but think about this, right? I mean, you don't have to see the whole staircase to be able to take the next couple of steps.
Yes.
And I think sometimes people want that whole path laid out for them. And it's like, no, you just need to make progress. You need to move in that direction, because once you start moving in that direction, you're going to get feedback somewhere that tells you shift just a little, right? I mean, if you're 1 degree off in navigation, you end up in a totally different place than you would be if you were on course. And so sometimes you start moving in what you think is the right direction, but that's when you get clarity about the smaller tweaks that you need to make along the way in order to get where you want to go. And sometimes they're larger pivots once you get down there, but you can't know those things until you get going, right? And I want to say this, right? One of the things that I think happens sometimes in our space, specifically with money, because I think there's ways that this relates, is that there is this feeling that people have of, if only I have a certain amount of money or a certain amount of income or like a certain net worth, that all of a sudden I'm going to behave differently than I'm currently behaving. And there's sort of this look for a magic pill that's going to fix the problem. Or like there's some people on social media right now talking about manifesting money into your life. And I think there's this element of, I'm just going to sort of make stuff happen and then have the money. And there's a shortcut that I can do it. And then I can have the life I want. I think it is really important, really vitally important, that you know what you want your life to look like first, and then actively start building that and using your money as a tool to help you get those things. So if you are trying to create passive income so that you can have more time freed up, then you need to be taking immediate steps in that direction, as opposed to just hoarding cash and hoping, oh, I'm just going to put it all on red and then magically it's going to be worth so much money that I don't have to think about these things, right? It doesn't work like that. And I think even thinking about 4,000 weeks in general, when you think about compounding, right? You have to start. You're losing the weeks.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why I'll be rich when I have X dollars. Or I can't get started because nobody will talk to me. I'm only saving $100 a month, or I'm only saving $1,000 a month. Nobody will talk to me because I'm not big enough. Like, so you start where you start. And if you can start to your point about the passive income, you may not have enough money to go buy a real estate or property or a business or whatever that's going to go produce a thing, but you can start saving. And while you're saving, you can train yourself. You could go through education so that when you have the money, you're already ahead of time. Like there's so many small things that you can do that aren't daunting. But I think just like within the productivity piece, if I could just stay busy, then nobody will know that I'm not doing what I should be doing. I think it's that radical incrementalism is a way to say, look, if I just got to go make the step, but we tell ourselves, I can't do this until when, is a way to let us off the hook for not reaching our dreams because we're not big enough yet.
Well, it's why people come up with bucket lists as opposed to active dreams
Correct.
pipelines, right? It's I can do this in the future. And I think most of the financial advice that's given today is about that. It's about save all your money, defer your gratification, and then at one day, 20, 30, 40 years from now, then you can live your dream life. And the problem is then you get there and your advisor says something that sounds like, oh, just kidding, you can't spend that much, you'll run out of money. Or the market gives you a sequence of returns that eats into your portfolio. Think 2008, and you've been delaying this life. That to me is the biggest tragedy. And I feel like that's really what this book is about, is like, don't do it's not saying don't think about the future. Let's be very clear about that. You have to
Yes.
take active steps to ensure that your future is going to be as good as it can be, but you cannot do that at the expense of living today. And that doesn't mean going out and blowing all your money out of fear that it won't be there for you in the future. It means really getting down to, what are my priorities? What do I need to let go of? And how do I make sure that the choices I'm making are bringing me closer to a life that I can eventually look back on and say, I did this right? But instead of waiting till the end of your life to have that conversation, you should actually be having that conversation with yourself every week.
Yeah. And
What
if
did I
nothing
do
else, every year.
at a minimum, right? But
Yeah.
like, why not make those series of small changes? It's like we were in a meeting with a woman named Amanda Matthews, and she teaches the entrepreneur's operating system.
Yeah.
And
She's
she
amazing.
talks about, she is amazing. And she talks about, okay, we're going to have an annual planning meeting to set the tone for 12 years, or not 12 years, but for the 12 months, right?
Right.
And then there's quarterly meetings where you're doing check-ins. But when you think about how people operate, like the work expands to fill the time allotted, right? You'll procrastinate, and then, oh shoot, it's due next week, and then you go crazy and you miss the goal because it's not really enough time to do it. Whereas if you're having a weekly check-in about, what did we do? What are the issues? What do we need to change? How do we do this? And then you're making strategic shifts on a quarterly basis, you actually get a lot more done because you can
Right.
deal with the issues while they're still small. And I think this book is a lot like that.
Yeah.
It's saying
100%.
like, I mean, you built a worksheet. Can I just read your questions real quick? Because I think this is to that point, right? What did you intentionally deprioritize this week? What was the impact on your business? What was the impact on your well-being? Was this the right choice? Right?
Yeah.
What demanded attention but didn't deserve it? How could this be handled differently next time? What boundaries do I need to set moving forward? That's brilliant. Like if
Uh,
you just asked yourself, and this is what I'm like, I am blown away by this. This is like on my to-do list on Monday mornings. What did I do well, right? What do I need to keep doing? What do I need to stop doing? What do I need to start doing? What do I need to modify? Like those are your
right.
questions too. And those are the things where if we ask ourselves that every single week and we hold ourselves accountable, we're going to get so much closer to what we actually want, right? What needs to be deprioritized in my week? I can tell you right now, it's scrolling on the internet. Now, you know what I'm going to do this week? This phone is just going straight into the basket when I get home. And I'm not checking it again until right before bed. And then I'm turning it off. I'm going to leave it plugged into the charger outside of my room.
You're further ahead than I am. I deleted
Oh,
a
it's
game
going to
this
be very
weekend.
painful. It's
I
going to be
deleted
very
a game.
painful. You what?
I deleted a game this weekend, and
Ooh,
I'm
which
like,
one?
that was the hardest one to get rid of. I love that game.
Which game?
I'm a little embarrassed. Balloon Tower Defense 6. I don't know.
Oh,
My 8-year-old introduced me to that, and I'm like, why do I need these stupid monkeys shooting arrows at other stupid monkeys? I don't understand, but it's so addictive.
and you can't stop. I had to do
Yeah.
that with Candy Crush. And then later I had to do it with a game called Homescapes. where you would play
Oh,
these little games and then it would like open up part of the room. And my kids finally told me, Mom, you play that for lots of time and ignore us. And then when we tell you to put it away, you're really grumpy. I was like, oh gosh. When your kids tell you that, they're like, could you please delete it and pay attention to us? Yes, I can. Yes, I can, kids.
that's
And then
awesome.
occasionally they're like, you could play it just a little. And I'm like, I
No, I
can't.
can't.
I
Because if I pick it
literally,
up, I will ignore you for an hour. Yes.
right. So I think, and then I think even looking at the second one, what demanded attention but didn't deserve it? I had an immediate visceral response to that. And
Yep.
it's literally personal drama, right? Like, not my drama, although I can certainly engage with it and then it becomes my drama, but other people's bad behavior that I don't need to be engaging with at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. The email I talked about in that class. Hey, Eric, I've got an opportunity for you to be an amazing human today. I'm like, you know what? I don't want to be an amazing human today. Thanks for the judge, though.
I'm already an amazing human. Thank you so much. And I'm
I'm
choosing
already
other
fully
opportunities
formed.
than this one. No, right? But I mean, that's the thing. We don't want to let people down because it means something about us when we do, right? We
Correct.
internalize that. And so, we end up doing these things for other people because we can't say no. And then the people we care most about are the ones that don't get our best and highest time because
Yes.
we've used it all on other people. And I know I have to believe that we are not the only people who feel this way. Um, but I do think when it comes down to it,
Yes.
the more clarity you have, and I got to relate this back to what we do because this is a financial podcast. I
Yeah.
think the more clarity you have on what really matters to you, the easier it is to use your finances in a way that gets you closer and closer to that life. Whether it's a permission slip to take the trip because you've already done the planning and your
Yes.
plan is on track for the right income, right? Whether it is building in the contingencies to a plan so that even when things go wrong in the world, your plan continues to function at a high level and you aren't delaying your retirement by 10 years because of a market fluctuation or
Yep.
having to come out of retirement because, ooh, you got a bad return in a particular year. I think laying the foundation for the future and making sure that you are living for right now at the same time is the whole point of all of
Yes.
this. And highly, highly recommend that you go out and get the book 4,000 Weeks. We don't receive anything, no compensation, any of that
There's
for
no
recommending
paid links,
it.
Mary. What do you mean?
There's no paid links. Perhaps I need to get an Amazon account for the
I was
times that
gonna
we're doing
mention.
this. But I think this is one of those books that just makes you think a little bit differently in ways that could change your current course if you are willing to take a hard look and answer some of those questions. And again, totally uncomfortable. I mean, I was very uncomfortable so much of the time while reading it, but the
Yes.
conversations that I'm having because of it, I think are the important ones.
Yeah, it told me I was supposed to have more patience. And I'm like, screw you. Who are you to tell me that? Hurry
Well,
up.
we're both screwed then. I don't have enough time for patience. Do you not see that? I only have 4,000 weeks.
I don't have enough time to read this book twice.
Oh, I'm going to read this book 3 times is what's
I
happened.
know.
And
I
then,
know.
there you go. But if it changes even the small decisions in a way that have a bigger impact on ultimate life satisfaction and fulfillment, I think that's a good thing. And I did not say happiness, right? Not fleeting
Yep.
feelings of, oh, this is better. This is about real fulfillment, soul deep, like, okay, I did it right.
Yeah.
And I did it my way because I feel like there's a lot that happens in this world that leads to sadness, depression, and loneliness that has to do with feeling like you aren't living up to other people's expectations as opposed to deliberately setting your own.
Yeah. Yeah. Where can they find you?
At The Wealth Woman, wherever you social media. What about you, Eric?
Yeah. At Acorn Grove, wherever you use social media. At Eric at Acorn Grove, wherever you. I don't know where the friend.
Just
At
Google Eric Alexander. It's not
yeah.
like it's a common name or anything.
Yeah. It's me and that one saxophone guy. That's it. All right.
Nice. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Specific financial concepts and advanced strategies are presented to you for educational purposes only. We cannot and do not guarantee their applicability to your individual circumstance. We encourage you to seek personalized advice from qualified professionals on all financial matters.
Provided content is for overview and is not intended and should not be relied upon as individualized tax, legal, fiduciary, or investment advice. Neither Wealth Woman, Acorn Grove, or the Wealth and Income podcast, nor their representatives provide tax or legal advice. For answers to specific questions and before making any decision, please consult a qualified attorney or tax advisors.
All numeric examples and any individual shown are hypothetical and were used for explanatory purposes only. Actual results may vary.
Investing involves risk, which includes potential loss of principal. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Guarantees are subject to the claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company.
Life insurance should be purchased by individuals that have a need to provide a death benefit to protect others with insurable interests in their lives against financial loss. Life insurance is not a retirement plan, investment, or savings account.
Not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or any governmental agency. Insurance and investment products, not a deposit, not FDIC or NCUA insured, not insured by any federal government agency, not guaranteed by any bank or credit union, may lose value.
Please visit the Wealth Woman website disclosure page for other important disclosures.